The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
On behalf of RBCS and software test professionals, welcome to today's webinar on measuring testing service providers. I am Rex Black, president of RBCS, a worldwide testing and quality assurance firm. We serve clients ranging from small startups to Fortune 20 global enterprises. We've been around since 1994, delivering insight and confidence to hundreds of clients around the world. Our team of international consultants deliver customized training, consulting, and outsourcing services for companies that are looking to improve their test and quality assurance practices. I am the author of 12 books on software testing, including the bestseller Managing the Testing Process, along with a number of other books, one of which I'll probably mention as relevant a little later in this presentation. We are presenting this webcast in partnership with Software Test Professionals. Please check out their website at softwaretestpro.com. Attendance at today's webinar earns PMI PDUs. I would like to thank Rex Price for reviewing the materials for PDU status and for making valuable suggestions. You will receive an email in the next 72 hours telling you how to claim the PDUs, including the PDU code. Please hold off on any requests for information about the PDUs until 72 hours have passed. Before we start the presentation, some housekeeping notes. First, sort of a personal one. I am recovering from some really nasty head cold, which has given me quite a cough, and I'm afraid I will be coughing probably throughout this presentation. Apologies in advance. I hope that is not too distracting to you. If you have questions at any time, feel free to submit them, but please note that they will only be answered at the end. We can only look at them when we get into the Q&A session in about 45 minutes. One question you do not need to ask is, where is the presentation on the internet? You can find the presentation at rbcs-us.com. Navigate to the resource tab in the upper middle, and from there navigate to the basic library. You also don't need to ask how to win the free e-learning drawing. Just by being here, by attending this webinar, you are automatically registered. So check your email over the next couple days and watch that spam filter. If you are having problems with the audio or visual components of the webinar, contact GoToWebinar support. These problems usually come down to one of three things: browser incompatibility, company firewalls that prevent the download of the GoToWebinar software, or audio settings on your PC. So that's the place to start. Hope you enjoy this free webinar from RBCS. We do these as a service to the software testing community because at RBCS we are a not just for profit company. All right, so outsourced testing has become big business. There's a lot of outsourced testing service providers that offer testing services to clients around the world. And anytime you're purchasing a service, this brings up the obvious question: did you receive the value that you expected? And if you're offering the service, if you're on the provider side of the relationship, you should be wondering, are we actually giving our clients what they need? Unfortunately, on both sides of the relationship, these questions are typically answered with educated or uneducated guesses, really, more than anything else. Like, how do you feel about the service? How are you, were you impressed or unimpressed by the way that people reacted? It's kind of this, very gut level, very informal type of evaluation, even in situations where considerable sums of money are involved. So the point of this webinar is to get people thinking about how to do a better job of assessing, measuring the success, failure, etc. of the testing services that they receive. How do we go beyond just a guess to facts and informed insights? So we'll look at ways of putting some facts in place, putting some measurements in place, really establishing what we actually know about the services being provided, how good they are or not, where they need to be improved. Pardon me, this is the first cough of the evening. So why does this matter? Why should we even care about this? Well, if all the testing that was going on accounted for just a teeny bit of money around the world and the outsourced testing in a teeny proportion of that teeny bit of money, then of course we wouldn't have to care as to whether this money was really being well spent. But Forrester, research firm, has estimated that $50 billion per year is spent on software testing. $50 billion. That's a big number. And 2/5 of that, 40%, are spent on outsourced testing services. So there's a lot of outsourced testing going on. It's a huge amount of money. And so, when you talk about a $20 billion expenditure, what's the return on that investment? What kind of value is being delivered to the customers? If you're a testing service provider, you should wonder, what value are we delivering to our customers? Are you helping them succeed? How are you helping them succeed? What do you do well? What do you do poorly? If you're on the client side of that relationship, same thing. How do I evaluate our testing service providers in a way that is fair to them and fair to us, fair to our fiduciary responsibilities to our stockholders, owners, customers, clients? So these are all very important, hard-headed business questions that need to be addressed, and they can't be addressed by people just taking this sort of gut reaction to how they felt about the way that testing was done in the last project. We need to get beyond that kind of I know it when I see it stuff. So the solution that I am proposing here should be no surprise to those of you who are familiar with me. Let's put some metrics in place. Let's put some structure around how we measure success, what we define as success. And the approach, for those of you who heard me talk about metrics before, again, will be familiar to you. We move through a process of a top-down process, not a bottom-up process. I think all too often organizations start with a bottom-up process to metrics, and they're like, oh, I can measure this, I can measure that, and they just start measuring things. And woo-wee, I've got metrics, and then there's metrics all over the place. And then somebody sits back and says, so what? What does that metric tell me? Why do I care about that metric? And people go, I don't know the answer to that question. And then people look silly. So what we want to do is go top down. Start off and say, what objectives do we have for the testing services that are being provided? What are we trying to accomplish? And based on those objectives, we can then define specific metrics to measure the effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction that we have with those objectives. Now, the next step is to say, all right, this is how we would measure it. Now, what can actually be done? What would we like to see done? What's within the realm of possibility and is good performance, and what is minimally acceptable performance? And you have to decide how frequently you want to measure these things. You're going to measure it quarterly. You're going to measure it semi-annually, annually. How often are you going to take these different measurements? And then think about how you would put process improvements in place over time. So, is it enough for the testing service providers to just hold steady at a particular measurement, or do we want to see them gradually improve over time? And how do we work collaboratively to see that, moving the needle in the right direction, as the cliche goes? Now, this process that I just laid out is, again, not going to be a surprise to any of you who are familiar with this webinar series and have listened to it before. Also, if you happen to have read my book on testing metrics, the ebook, it's available from Amazon and also from our website, you'll have seen this exact process laid out before. Now, what we are talking about here are process metrics. We are measuring the process. Okay? They are not the kind of project and product metrics that we use when we are trying to make release decisions. They can be related. They can use similar underlying data, such as defect data, but they are not the same. And they most assuredly are not people metrics. They're process metrics. So you need to be very careful about saying, oh, this measurement came up bad, and therefore, this individual is a moron. This individual failed. This individual is culpable. No, what we're measuring here are processes. Now, it is the testing service provider's job to define a process collaboratively with their clients that will meet their clients' needs and be effective and efficient and satisfying within the context of those client needs. But again, this is not and should not be used to direct criticism personally at any particular individual. Excuse me. What I am proposing here, and will outline, give examples of over the next few minutes, is something that is quite feasible for any organization that is using testing service providers, and for any organization that is a testing service provider and is looking to put some structure in place that will, allow it to differentiate itself from its competitors. So, the client side need for this is clear. Make sure that we're getting the value for our money. But again, so I want to stress that on the service provider side, this also has value, because if you can figure out what matters to your customers and figure out how to do better at it, then this is something that you can trumpet as, reasons to use us as opposed to our competitors, because we know how to connect to what you value, and we can prove to you that we'll deliver that. So this is not, and should not be seen as a way to gather ammunition to beat your testing service provider with. It should be seen as a way of how client-focused serving providers work effectively and collaboratively with their clients to maximize the success that the client achieves, and thus the value delivered by the provider. That should be everybody's goal. Any ethical provider should have that as their goal, as well as, of course, any client wanting to receive that. Excuse me. Okay, so let's look at some examples and work through this. Now, these examples, I'm just going to pick and choose some examples out of literally dozens that we've defined for various clients that we help put these into place. I don't want anyone going away here tonight thinking, oh, this is great, I just got a comprehensive program for doing measurements, and I know everything I need to know. No, this is a starting point. This is food for thought. It is not the last word on this topic by any means. Obviously, I would be happy to help if you were to need additional help with defining this, or you can go off and research this further on your own. Come up with a good set of metrics. But don't just take the ones I talk about and just go with those. I also want to mention something else about the metrics before we dive into the specific example. Anytime you put a metric in place, you have to think about the behaviors and potentially misbehaviors that metric will incentivize. What I mean by that is, when you put a metric in place, you start to measure something in the process. People will look at that and say, "Aha, that's what that's what's supposed to happen, right?" They figure out what direction the needle is supposed to move in, up or down, and then they change their behaviors to push that needle in that direction. This is just basic human psychology. That if clear objectives are defined and laid out, and the way in which they are measured are laid out, that people will say, "Okay, I can do that." So sometimes those behaviors will be good, and every now and then you'll put metrics in place that actually could potentially motivate some misbehaviors. Now, the trick to dealing with that is to make sure that you have balanced and offsetting metrics, such that any metric that might lead to somebody to do the wrong thing would be offset by a metric somewhere else that would effectively catch the fact that that wrong thing was happening. So just something else to keep in mind. Again, I'm not pretending, not proposing what I'm laying out here as a complete set of metrics, nor am I suggesting that these set of metrics that I'm laying out are balanced in and of themselves. You need to make sure that that balance is in place so that you do not construct a system of metrics that incentivizes misbehavior. Now, so let's look at an example. So most of the time when organizations hire testing service providers, one of the things that they want that testing service provider to do is to find defects. So let me see if I can possibly have a little more luck with the pen than I did this afternoon. It's a sort of disastrous presentation of this earlier. Included things for some reason falling off of a filing cabinet, making a tremendously loud noise, and then the poll not working too. So we'll try to do better this time. So defect detection percent or effectiveness is the number of defects detected. So try to get that in here. We're running out of real estate on the screen there. Okay, the number of defects detected divided by the number present. And apologies for the kindergartner-looking writing here, but you try to write with your thumb on a touchpad. It's or fourth finger on a touchpad. It's not anywhere near as elegant as my handwriting, which is nowhere near near to elegant, by the way, if any of you have ever seen me handwrite. So, number of defects detected divided by the number present that could be detected. That's the defect detection effectiveness. Now, the problem with that, some of you are probably thinking of, well, how do I know how many were present? Well, it turns out, if we're talking about testing at the end of the life cycle, right prior to release, this actually becomes a whole lot simpler. So we take the number of defects found by the test team and divide it by the number of defects found by the test team plus the number of defects that were subsequently revealed in production. Okay. Now, pardon me. That's fairly straightforward definition. Now, there's some things that you need to do. Like, for example, you got to eliminate duplicates. Otherwise, it's easy for the test team to swamp the metric, or production incidents to swamp the metric. You have to make sure that you're actually looking at defects, not incidents. And you want to remove the invalid defects on both sides of that equation, the test and production side. Make sure that you're looking at actual defects, not, just something that somebody did that they really shouldn't have tried to do. So you got to scrub the data a little bit and calculate it. Now, you can try to calculate this on a project-by-project basis, but sometimes that becomes a little difficult, especially if you have frequent releases. So the easier thing to do typically is to use some sort of rolling 3-month or 6-month or 12-month average, which has a little bit of error based on what numbers are included and excluded, as an accident of release dates. But most of our clients are able to figure out a way of coming up with that number and with it that has some sort of meaningful and understandable built-in error in it that can be kind of factored out with respect to how the metric is used. Now, what are you looking for? So what I have recommended for some of our clients is 95% as the target. Pardon me. Let me get a sip of tea here. 95% as the target, with 90% as a minimum. Now, basically what the minimum means is, below this amount, there's going to be consequences of some kind, contractual consequences. What those are, how severe those are, and so forth, that's something that you want to kind of be thoughtful about. You certainly don't want to just say, hey, great, you guys missed the target, bang, we're terminating the contract. But at the same time, there do need to be some sort of meaningful consequences associated with failing to hit a minimum. Now, that said, there should be also an upside for the testing service provider associated with hitting the target, or hitting the target some number of times in a row, or 3 measurements out of 5 or something like that. So, you want to incent correct behavior and disincent incorrect behavior, right? And make sure that the process is, being pointed in the right direction. So that's a good one. Now, another good one is, not only do you want testing service providers to find a lot of defects, a majority of the defects, but you want to make sure that they're focused on the important defects, because certainly nothing is easier than reporting a whole ton of unimportant stuff, trivial, cosmetic things that nobody would ever really notice. But it's like, well, look at that. That little GIF file is off by 1 pixel, and so that's a defect. That's not to say that you don't want people to report that, but you don't want people to perseverate on reporting the easy stuff, the easy trivial stuff, to the exclusion of the more important things. So what you need to do here is figure out what constitutes an important defect. Hopefully you've got some sort of severity scale, priority scale, or something that can be used to define what important is. And then you can calculate defect detection effectiveness as on the previous slide, but just include the important defects. Now, the key thing here is you got to make sure that your definition of important is consistent, and by that I mean consistent across all the participants in the defect reporting process, consistent with respect to production and test defects, consistent in terms of usage across projects. Otherwise, you're going to have a great deal of difficulty getting this metric to be meaningful. It can be done. We've seen clients that do it. You just have it requires some discipline. But with that discipline, you can make this work. Now, recommended target we've recommended for other clients is 99% of the important defects, with 95% as a minimum. Now, are these numbers that I've been throwing out here reasonable for you or for your organization under any given set of circumstances? I don't know. I'm not there. I'm not looking at your particular circumstance. Of course, through the magic of money, all things are possible. If you want to have me come and do that. But, if you need to figure this out on your own, then you'll need to spend some time thinking about this. I just want to stress that these goals, these recommendations that I'm throwing out there are purely, as is all of this presentation, food for thought to get you thinking, not some sort of predefined script that you can get, oh, well, it says 99% here, so therefore that must be the right number. Might be, might not be. All right, now something else that we want out of a testing service provider is that they tested everything that we needed them to test. So what's the scope? What is to be covered? What is the test basis? That should be clearly defined. And the onus is on the client as much as on the service provider to define this. The client can reasonably expect the service provider can reasonably expect the client, if they're going to measure the service provider on this metric, the client be the one that provides the clearly defined test basis. Now, given a clearly defined test basis, we can then say what percentage of those basis elements have been covered. Now, by covered, what I'm talking about here is that we have existing tests, that they have been defined, that some process has been followed to, for example, sampling to determine that indeed where the tests are defined, that they cover the requirement or the risk or the persona or the configuration option, what have you, to the appropriate extent. So you have enough testing, not too much, not too little, and then ultimately those tests are executed. Now, we also need to have some way of excluding from this metric any test basis element that cannot be tested for reasons that are not under the control of the testing service provider. So, for example, if the function or feature that's associated with some number of risks and requirements is never actually provided to the testing service provider, or is not provided in a timely fashion, and for them in time to test it, then obviously measuring their ability to cover that would be inappropriate. Excuse me. So given that we have the mechanism in place to establish the test basis and to manage changes in the test basis over time, and to be sure that this is a fair metric, then you would want 100% coverage, both as a target and as a minimum. I mean, if there's work to be done that's included within the scope of the engagement, there's really no reason why it isn't done, other than the client never gave it to me to test, so I couldn't test it. All right, here's another metric that I would suggest, useful metric. Are the reports being provided in a timely fashion? So testing is something that is about providing value by the delivery of information in various ways. And information has to be received in a timely fashion in order to be valuable. So, yesterday's paper isn't very interesting. A recording of yesterday's news program becomes less interesting as time goes by. So what you can do is look at the different information work products, defect reports, test status reports, etc., that are to be delivered by the testing service provider. What information are they supposed to give to you, and define what on time would mean for each one of those reports. And then what you can do is a couple things. One is, if the volume of those reports are small and it's not difficult to capture this information, then you just check to see when is every report received, and classify that as on time or late, and you calculate the metric that way. If there's a larger volume of information flowing in and the mechanics of capturing that is a little difficult, then what you do is you just count the exceptions. Basically, you just look at how many times did a report show up noticeably late, that actually had some sort of impact. Obviously, it's not up to the testing service provider to say that. I mean, they might get away with getting some of them in late and nobody notices, but they're not going to know in advance what those are. So it's sort of a form of sampling. So then you just have, if you have some way of predicting, this is the number of reports that we typically would receive over a 5-week, 10-week, 15-week, whatever, 3-month period, however you want to define it. And this is the number of exceptions that we had, that is, reports that were delivered late. And therefore, this is where we are in terms of the percentage reports delivered on time. It should be a little easier to calculate that. So there's some different ways of calculating this metric, but the basic idea here is you want to hold the testing service provider accountable for getting you the information that they said they were going to give you when they said they were going to give it to you. For other clients, we've recommended that 98% be the target. That's expected behavior. Overperformance on that results in some sort of reward. And then 95% is the minimum. You could say, well, shouldn't it be 100%? Yeah, well, stuff happens. People are human. And when you're talking about timeliness, it's a little different than some other things where, it's possible to make a mistake in some cases and then catch it and go, oh, and then they fix that later. When you're talking about timeliness, there's a time element. It's usually possible and impossible to be anywhere approaching perfect on this. All right, I want to talk about skills, measurement of skills, and people putting the appropriately skilled people on projects, service providers putting the appropriately skilled people on projects. Before I do that, I want to get into something important to understand why I consider this a big deal. So competence remains a major issue in the testing profession. Excuse me. And what I mean by that is that there's still quite a bit of anyone can test out there. There are, people who just assume, oh yeah, and you can put anybody on any application and they can test it. Now, in some organizations, they have a better understanding of the need for competency with respect to either technology or the application domain. The competency with respect to testing skills is still pretty poorly understood, I would say, in a lot of our profession. Now, what are the implications of that? Well, there are a number, but before we get into those implications, first, something on the nature of where outsourced and crowdsourced work tends to happen. So if we look at industrialized developed regions like North America, Europe, Japan, Australasia, you know, basically systems that have had a very active science, technology, engineering, and math professions, and particularly IT professions operative in them for the entirety of software engineering, period of software engineering in human history, which basically been the last 60 years or so, since about the 1950s. Those developed regions, if you look at the number of people that are available to work in an organization and the number of years of experience they have, what you will find, oops, I knew it was going to do that, bloody thing. All right, this is 40 years. So it is possible in a developed region to find people who've got in the 30 to 40 years of experience range, actively practicing in the profession. I've got, as of this year, I've got 30 years of experience in IT. I got started in 1983, that's doesn't make me all that exceptional. I mean, there are plenty of other people out there, and then if you look at people in the, say, 15 to 30 years experience, which is kind of the core cadre of experts, if you will, in a developed region, there are a lot of people like that. And then you look at people who are kind of, more kind of coming into the field down here in the 5 years or less. They've got a real healthy cadre of senior people to look up to and say, oh, that's what expertise means. That's what I need to aspire to with respect to expertise. Now, unfortunately, unfortunately, this is just the way it is. This is something to deal with. If you were to look at a typical developing region where a lot of the outsourced testing is happening, you'd be hard-pressed, to find people with 20 years of experience in IT. You might find a few expatriates who have been working in developed regions and have now come back. And there certainly are exceptions that are, countries are looking to address this kind of skills gap. I think Malaysia's 10,000 certified testers initiative that they have underway. But for the most part, what you're going to find is that there is a dearth of very senior people, even people that could be legitimately considered experts, people in this sort of 10-year, 5 to 10-year range are pretty limited. And because there's a lot of people coming into the profession, the base of the triangle is growing very fast relative to the height of the apex. Because remember, the height of the apex, this moves up over time, right? No matter how many new testers we introduce into the cadre in a developing region in a year, still the people at the apex only get one more year experience at the end of that year. So you pucker that triangle out at the bottom, and yes, that makes more testers available, but it also means that there is, on a percentage basis, fewer people available who are experts at the higher levels of experience who are able to mentor them. Okay, so what does that all mean? Well, that means that managing the skills of the testers that are in the organization, outsourced testing service organization, and retaining those testers becomes extremely critical, because that skills growth is a hard-won thing. You've got these challenges of having these mentors and this expertise in place, and turnover is a real problem, because people coming in are going to tend to be coming in at that low level of experience. So this is why I have recommended for clients that they accept only properly qualified testers from their testing service providers. Now, as a testing service provider, if you want to position yourself as a purveyor of excellence, a service provider should be looked at as sort of the Lamborghini, the marquee brand, then you want to really guard their reputation with respect to putting qualified people on and keeping them on as a key way of assessing how well you're doing. So the way that one way to do this is you look at the percentage of qualified testers that have been assigned. The top part of this equation is you look at how many testers who were proposed for the client were actually accepted and are still working on a client project a year later. Okay. And so there's two pieces there. One has to do with the acceptance, and the other has to do with the turnover, right? Excuse me. What we're trying to do is identify basically how many testers were proposed that were determined by the client to be unqualified or that left and created a turnover problem for the client. So in order to do this, you have to make sure you've got clearly defined qualifications so the testing service provider can know what is expected of a proposed candidate. The client has to get engaged in evaluating the resumes and interviewing clients so that they make a deliberate decision about accepting. And then there needs to be a tracking to make sure that, yes, a year later, these people have been successful. We've had success with keeping them on, they haven't left, etc. What I'm going to recommend here is a 98% target with a 95% minimum. So in other words, I don't want out of 100 people, 100 proposed participants on a project or as testers for an organization, no more than 5 can either be washed out during the interview process, determined to not be qualified, or be lost through some sort of turnover for whatever reason during that year of service. So in order to make this work, you got to have the client engaged in the interview and approval of the testers by name. We have to say, yes, this tester is qualified to participate. There have to be clawbacks in place for turnover. So if people leave, testers leave, then the financial consequences of that should fall on the testing service provider as much as they fall on the client. And another thing to achieve good integration is if on both the client side and the testing service provider side you have the same tester certification, which I'd say, foundation, ISTQB foundation for all the testers, advanced test manager for the test leads and test managers, and advanced test analyst or technical test analyst as appropriate for the staffers, that you're going to have a lot fewer issues with getting people able to effectively work together. Now here's another interesting metric that you might consider, which is to look at the percentage of test efforts that the testing service provider completes within their budget. Now, this is a metric that can work, or it can be completely irrelevant, or it can be completely impossible. So you have to kind of think about this one. So, is there actually a good process for figuring out how long things are going to take, or is the extent of change so momentous that doesn't make any sense to do this? And if you're in an agile situation, it might be very difficult to do. If the testing service provider is providing a fixed bid proposal, then you actually don't care about this because staying within the budget is their problem. So, this is something to think about. Do you want to do this? But, if you're paying time and materials, you want to try to manage this, because otherwise what ends up happening is you just get you get killed for change orders, basically. All right, so I set out at the beginning of this presentation to say, yeah, let's look at metrics, let's make this rational. I kind of bashed opinions. Now, I'm not against the use of opinion as a way of measuring things, but let's put some structure around the gathering of opinion. Let's just ask somebody, how do you feel about the test and service provider? Well, depending on their mood, they could feel good, they could feel bad. So, what you want to do is use a more focused statement and apply a Likert scale to these when you're surveying people and gather up these opinions in a way that's really measurable. So we're going to put one of these into action right here, right now. And I hope to have a whole lot more success with this than I had this afternoon when this blew up in my face. But consider this statement. I enjoy eating chocolate cake. And consider this 5-point Likert scale. A 1 means, no, I hate chocolate cake. Eating chocolate cake is horrible for me. 2 is disagree. So that's, no, I don't really enjoy eating chocolate cake. I might do it from time to time, but yeah, it's not something that I by any means go out of my way to do, and I actually dislike it. 3 is, well, I can take it or leave it. Sometimes chocolate cake's okay, but I'm not excited about it. Agree would mean, yep, chocolate cake, definitely something I enjoy doing. Strongly agree means, oh, I love chocolate cake, and anytime somebody gives me the option of eating chocolate cake, I really, really have trouble resisting doing that, and I'm tempted to do it under all circumstances, even when I shouldn't. So there's the scale. So what we're going to do here, and we'll see how this works, I'm going to give you a poll on this right now. I'm going to ask you to react using that Likert scale and tell me how you feel about eating chocolate cake. Pardon me. So let's see who's reacting to this. Nobody has voted yet. There we go. People are starting to vote. Ooh, so far strongly in favor of chocolate cake. But only 21% of you have voted. Now 24%. Come on, don't be shy. Chocolate cake, man. It's not controversial. It's something that anybody can react to. I mean, if you've never had it, then I would guess that would make you neutral. 34% voted. 38, 41. Aha. Let's keep it going. So far, everybody's very, very pro chocolate cake. If anybody hates chocolate cake, you better jump in there and register your opinion. We have a dissenter. We do. We have a dissenter up, and the dissenter's being drowned out by somebody else. Up. Less than half of you have voted, though. Come on, you guys are making this like an American election here. You got to voice your opinion. Everybody's got an opinion about chocolate cake, right? Maybe somebody's never had chocolate cake. They have no opinion. I'm going to close the polling here in 10 seconds. I have no more takers. Only 48% of you have voted. Some of you are just refusing to be baited on the chocolate cake issue. All right, I'm going to close the poll. And we're going to resume the slideshow here. Make sure that everybody is actually seeing the presentation, and it does seem that that is happening. We had a problem with this earlier. If anybody is not able to see the presentation right now, please say so on your Q&A panel, because earlier we had a problem with this. Is anybody not able to see the presentation at this moment in time? Going once, going twice. No, okay. So I'm assuming everybody can see the presentation. That's good. Let's take a look at the poll. So what was the reaction here? Nobody strongly disagreed with the statement, I enjoy eating chocolate cake. All right, so we had no chocolate cake haters. We did have a disliker or 2 or 3 out there. 7% of you disagree with the statement. You apparently do not enjoy eating chocolate cake. I'm sorry that that's the case for you, but That's okay. I'm assuming there's something else that you enjoy eating. 21% of you were neutral. Don't care one way or the other about chocolate cake. 57% agree. Yes, I enjoy eating chocolate cake. And 14% of you strongly agree. And, I didn't vote, but if I had voted, I would have been in that strongly agree category. I love eating chocolate cake. Chocolate cake is very, very pleasant. In fact, if I ate all the chocolate cake that I wanted to eat, I would probably look something like a beach ball. So, thank God it's something I have some strength of will to resist. All right, so anyway, that was a lighthearted attempt to illustrate this whole concept of surveys and Likert scales. Hopefully you see how that works. The key there is it's a focused statement that elicits a very clear reaction. It's not some sort of vague like, how do you feel about this and service provider? It's got to be focused, and there needs to be a clearly defined scale because otherwise we can't really put some sort of metric around this. So how would we use this to survey about something other than chocolate cake? And again, I'm going to check and see, is anybody experiencing difficulty seeing the screen? No. Okay, then I don't know exactly why we had that problem this afternoon, but it's extremely frustrating that it did happen. Anyway, thank God it's not happening to you guys. I'm glad that this is working well. So we want to give information to, we testing service providers want to give information to our clients that they understand and can act on, right? I mean, that's part of what you as a client would expect. So survey the people who receive the reports on 3 questions or 3 statements. Are the results reports meaningful and clear? Are the results reports providing needed information? And do the results reports accurately predict post-release system quality? So those 3 statements. So what I would recommend is that you survey each of those on that 5-point Likert scale. You want to target for each one of those, average across all of the surveyed stakeholders of 4.5, and 4 is a minimum. Okay. Now, getting down to a more tactical level, we could survey the programmers and other people who receive the specific defect reports on how they feel about the defect reports. So a couple questions to ask here. One is, does the vendor provide meaningful and clear defect reports? Do the vendor's defect reports include all information needed to find and remove the underlying defect? So that could be useful. Now, I would caution that if you're in a situation where you have different outsourced services providers, some doing development, some doing testing, and they're effectively competitors against each other, this can be very difficult because you're basically asking one competitor to rate their competitors, one company to rate their competitors' services, and you can imagine what the results of that's going to be. But to the extent that the recipients of the defect reports are unbiased, then this can certainly work. Now, I would also recommend that you look at the percentage of reports rejected and the percentage of duplicate reports as another way of measuring the goodness of the reporting process. Okay. Still don't see any evidence of problems with respect to the presentation. Again, I'm perplexed as to what happened this afternoon, but it's good that it's working here. So, just to conclude before we get into a little Q&A, again, I'm making no attempt to be exhaustive here. I'm just giving you some ideas, some representative concepts, stuff that you can take back and go, this is worth thinking about. Maybe I can do this. Maybe I can do that. What I'm doing is sort of I don't know, it's an initiative, trying to get out in front of something. I feel like that I run into way too much with my clients of just these really important initiatives being managed like, I don't know, like somebody would manage getting lunch at a fast food place. Maybe not quite that haphazard, but just, based on this sort of unstructured opinions. And I mean, we're talking about $50 billion here. You know, this is worth doing right. This is worth thinking more about. We need to approach this from a more solid engineering and management perspective. So let's put some measurements in place. If you're on the service provider side of this relationship, great. You know, think about how to prove that you're good. You want to be good, right? You don't want to just make a lot of money. You want to make a lot of money because you're good. If you're on the client side of this, you don't want to be taken to the cleaners, right? You want to get what you paid for. So, you know, let's get more business-like about this. I think that this presentation can be part of how we start to think about being a little more business-like, a little more like engineers. Excuse me. Wow. At least it was better than this afternoon when I think I coughed out my left lung. Anyway, I'm going to put the ad up, and we're going to go into Q&A. So if you haven't already sent questions in, do so now. We have a comment here. Hi, I am Piyush from New Delhi, India. Hi, Piyush. Maybe I'll see you in a month when I'm month-ish, or over a month, 6 weeks, when I'm in Bangalore at the Next Generation Testing Conference. Marie says 5. Strongly agree. I enjoy eating chocolate cake. And, you know, Marie, you and I should, like, have chocolate cake together next time I'm down in, I think you're in Australia. Because it sounds like that's something that both you and I enjoy. I definitely enjoy a good piece of chocolate cake. Let's see, some email questions. Are these metrics fair? Well, they can be. They can be unfair, too. I mean, you know, you have to think about what you're trying to do here and how you're going to go about putting these metrics in place. If you put the metrics in place when, you know, there's no, you know, you're in the middle of a contract, it's already, the engagement's already running, and all of a sudden, you know, you as a client go back to the testing service provider and go, hey, guess what? We're now going to spring on you a bunch of these measurements, and we're going to hold you accountable. We're going to penalize you. Well, no, that's not really fair. I mean, there has to be some way of integrating this into the whole procurement process in a way that, you know, nobody's surprised. Definitely, you know, if you're in that point or in that step in the process where you're like, okay, we're ready to, you know, open this up to rebidding and so forth, then you know, this is a great place to put this process in. Also, yeah, again, remember balance. You don't want to incentivize stupid behavior, behavior that's bad for one side or the other. So, you know, fair means it drives the right behavior on everybody's part, right? So again, you know, as I was saying before, be balanced about this stuff. But yes, these metrics, I mean, the examples I gave are all metrics that have been used as part of a fair way of measuring testing service providers in other organizations. Let's see. Marie says that would be cool with respect to the chocolate cake. We have Max Brenner's great chocolates. All right. So Marie, anything you can do to incentivize people to invite me down there? It's really simple. People wave money at me, I come running. It's how that works. So if there's any opportunities to get me down there for a conference or engagement or something, you're up. I will buy the first slice of chocolate cake. Second slice might be on you. David asks, can you further explain clawbacks? Okay, clawback, this might be a U.S. term. Excuse me. Basically, what a clawback is it's a clause in a contract that says that if you, the people being paid under this contract, do this thing, whatever this undesirable thing is, you will suffer this financial penalty. And it's called a clawback because the financial penalty is that some money that has been previously paid for service rendered will be either clawed back, in other words, it has to be returned, or deducted from future payments for future services rendered, which is more common, to make up for that. So, for example, let's say that we have determined that it takes a month for someone to ramp up and become an effective testing resource on a project. So what you might say is, during that month period of time, basically half of the money being paid to each resource is an investment in ramping them up. So therefore, if a resource leaves within 6 months of being ramped up, well, we want to get repaid for that time that we paid for that person when they were learning our application and how to test it. So we're going to claw back half of the pay that that the testing service provider got for that particular resource that is just left for that month period. And it could, the retention period could be 6 months, it could be 12 months, it could be 18 months. It's usually based on how long the ramp-up period is. So that's how a clawback works. And they are quite effective at motivating retention. Let's see, what else we got here? Rajesh asks, how do you assess or select a service provider before you actually start engaging them? Most of the samples in the presentations after the fact. Absolutely. That's exactly what this presentation was about, Rajesh. It was about measuring testing service providers. You put this stuff in place as part of your RFP or request for proposal. It gets baked into the contract, and then you measure them as they go along. Now, excuse me, I did a little T there. You might say, okay, but yeah, what does that do for selection? Well, basically what it does, Rajesh, is it encourages rational self-selection. If you tell the vendor that you're going to hold them accountable on certain things, and you are going to institute financial penalties if they do not perform, if they don't think they're able to do that, then it's be kind of stupid for them to go ahead and engage in the contract. Now, you have to have some amount of care that what's happening on both sides of the relationship. Neither party is benefited by entering into a relationship where failure is guaranteed outcome. That is not going to be beneficial, and especially when contract is set up using the kind of metrics that I'm talking about, because that's going to have the effect of pointing significant financial penalties directly at the testing service provider and holding them accountable to those. So part of what's happening with these metrics is it eliminates organizations that look at them and go, oh, no, we're not going to be able to just play these people as suckers, and we're going to actually have to deliver, and we don't want to be held accountable to that. And so, some people will just opt out of it, and that's great. That's great for both sides. Now, am I suggesting that putting these measurements in place is all you need to do with respect to the selection process? Absolutely not. And if I were doing a presentation on how to select a testing service provider, I'd be talking about a whole bunch of other stuff in addition to this. I think I might have actually at one point done a presentation like that, but I'll go back and check, and if I haven't at some point in the future, I will. Let's see, I got a comment here, question. Hello, Rex. This is Cassie from Shanghai. Shanghai, I love Shanghai. I hope you're enjoying some fine Chinese food there tonight. I remember some of the dinners I had in Shanghai very fondly. As for defect detection effectiveness, detected bugs divided by present. About present, how do we count how many defects we could discover at present? Thank you, she says. So, Cassie, that's a good question. I mean, basically what we're going to do is we're going to approximate present by looking at the number of bugs that were subsequently detected in production. And, how long do you wait to take that measurement kind of depends on how long it takes for, say, 90% of defects to be reported in production after a release. As I said, one way to kind of get around this is just to use a rolling 6-month or 12-month or 2-year average. You try to run that different ways and see, how it best works out. But this is it is a useful metric, but you have to be careful to kind of tune the collection of it. I've got some discussion of this as a recorded webinar on testing metrics. It's available out on the digital library, and as I mentioned before, you can also check my book on testing metrics to get some more ideas on that. Rajesh says, thank you. You are welcome. Piyush says, thanks for this wonderful webinar. You are quite welcome to that. So, let's see, Krissa. Hey, Krissa, how are you? Asks, how would you present metrics results that highlight issues with a person or group without making it personal? Well, I think the focus has to be relentlessly objective. These are what the metrics tell us. We haven't hit these targets. This is how we know that the numbers are correct. I mean, it's a good point in the sense that certainly to the extent that these metrics identify a testing service provider potentially as underperforming with respect to their commitments, yeah, there's going to be a reaction to that. You better believe it. And the bigger the dollar amount, the more shockwaves that reaction will set off. And, of course, you don't know, depending on what level you're at, if you're a director of testing, director of QA, test manager or something, you don't know who signed the contract with that testing service provider, and therefore you don't necessarily know what level of protection they have from on high, as it were. And, of course, you do know that the bigger the amount of the contract, the more highly placed that protection might be. So yeah, this can get political without a doubt. But you have to sort of ask yourself, okay, this could get political using these metrics, but is that any less political or any more political than is it any more political than the situation that will prevail otherwise, which is where you might be saying, look, this just sucks. I mean, these guys are doing horrible work, but you've got nothing to stand on, and now it's purely a beauty contest. It's purely a popularity contest. It's about who likes who, and it's all about politics, if it's just about opinion. At least here, you're making this objective, and the testing service provider has agreed to be measured this way. Will they grouse about it if later they are found to underperform with respect to those metrics? You bet. But if you don't have this kind of thing, it just becomes an exercise in pure organizational politics and really nasty. And I've seen this happen in a few situations. I've been in the middle of it personally myself, where organizations that had contracted to do things for my clients just brazenly didn't do it, and then I found myself in situations where the managers who signed off on their contracts were like, oh no, these guys are doing fine. And I'm like going, no, they're not. They're not satisfying the contracts. But because we didn't have hard and fast things in place that I could point to and go, that, and that have not happened, then it all became about, personal conflict between me and the service provider, and it's just ugly. So, I'm not going to claim that this is going to completely depersonalize the situation, but what I am saying is that this at least makes it more a conversation about facts and less a conversation about who loves who. All right. So that's kind of winds down the Q&A. So I'm gonna close this session. I'll tell you a little bit more about the resources available through RBCS. As I think a lot of you know, I see a lot of regular attendees here. These are free webinars run once a month. Check our website, rbcs-us.com, to sign up. If you want a special webinar presentation of this webinar or on any other topic, please send an email to info@rbcs-us.com or contact us via our website. If you are not already receiving our regular free newsletter, so you can also sign up at rbcs-us.com. This will get you valuable discounts on consulting and training services and a regular newsletter. That newsletter includes a featured article on software testing and quality and news about what we're up to. Follow us on Twitter at RBCS or on Facebook, RBCS-INC. Be sure to check your email over the next couple days because you could well be the lucky winner of a free e-learning course from RBCS. You were registered simply by attending this free event. Though I would mention that since we have a holiday here in the United States, the notification might not go out until Tuesday, Wednesday of next week. The digital library is available on the RBCS website. It's got recordings of the webinars, podcasts, and videos, so take a look at that. You can listen to podcasts by subscribing in iTunes, enter RBCS podcast into the search string, or you can subscribe to the RBCS channel on YouTube, and you can access these recorded webinars even if you don't have the Citrix downloads that can be involved, or the Flash downloads that can be involved in accessing these recorded webinars on our digital library. We offer these free resources as a service to the software testing community because at RBCS we are a not-just-for-profit company. This concludes the webinar, and thank everyone for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you next month.